Thanks for joining us on The World This Week in association with the Daily Beast. I'm Hala Mohyuddin. This, of course, is where we chew over the burning issues of the day and examine the stories which have dominated the headlines over the past week. Joining me to discuss the world this week, Christopher Dickey, foreign editor at the Daily Beast. Good to have you with us. And Elena Servatas, journalist and Russia expert with Radio France International. Thanks also for being with us. And thank you too at home for joining us. You can take part with the hashtag TWTW or tweet to @F24Debate. Now, the Syrian conflict has been rumbling on for years, but was blasted back into the headlines this week, not just due to the horror of the bloodshed and the brutal nature of the fight, but also the military developments, which have experts debating whether a turning point is near. This is the week that Russia and Iran decided to join forces, with Tehran taking the unprecedented step to allowing a foreign power to launch airstrikes from Iranian bases. Well, no sooner had this new alliance been announced than other news from Aleppo stunned the world. The image of a 5-year-old boy injured and in shock. Another tragic image of a child that provoked global outrage at this most brutal of conflicts. Elena Servatas, let me start with you. What's your reaction to events in Syria this week?
We were speaking about this subject about Russia and Iran using the same basis for the first time, but we were not surprised at all. At least at my services, because they had a long time connection, and we know how Iran is interested of keeping Bashar al-Assad in power, the same as Russia, and it's much more surprising for outside viewers for them to see that Iran really allow infidel, as we say, powers to be on their territories. As for Russia, keeping a connection with Iran, it's like helping them to grow the strength of Bashar al-Assad. But it was really not surprising that they are acting together. And it's also the matter of distance, I guess, because they were using South Caucasus bases before, and it's much longer territory. So as soon as they fly from Iran, it's strategically much more interesting.
Well, yeah, I think the bomber that they were using out of Iran and maybe out of the South Caucasus is too big for the air base that they've established already in Syria. So I think there was a logistical thing. But I think it also reflected what has been not a great moment for the Russian, Iranian, Assad, Hezbollah alliance, which is that they had seemed to have sealed off Aleppo and the opposition in Aleppo. And then all of a sudden there was a concerted move, and the blockade was broken. And all of a sudden, it was a great setback for their strategic effort to seal off and eventually crush the opposition in Aleppo. So only after that did we then suddenly see that they're flying these jets, these bombers, out of Iran. And I think that's because they are trying to keep up the pressure, but they're also being pushed back in some key places.
Do you think this is a turning point, Christopher Dickey? Do you believe that we could start to see the Syrian regime, Russia and Iran regaining the upper hand?
Well, I think that's their idea for sure, and they have a lot of resources with which to do it, which is more than you can say of most of the opposition. And yet the opposition does keep fighting on. It's really surprising, and although some of the opposition is jihadists, a lot of it is not, and it's surprising and edifying to see that they're able to fight on the way they're doing.
But of course, the other big news from Aleppo, of course, is on the humanitarian nature, particularly those very upsetting images of that 5-year-old child that went viral. Elena Servatas, do you think that this is in some way going to provoke a different kind of turnaround in the conflict? Do you think public opinion will push this conflict in another way after seeing those images?
I think it will change absolutely nothing, because you remember, Chris, we were several months ago in the same studio discussing Aylan Kurdi, and we were discussing how shocking this image and why people were reacting. And when I heard those people from United Nations telling us that this very picture would change and would move something on, I don't believe at all. Nothing will change.
No, I mean, look, the problem is that this kind of picture provokes short-term emotions, huge outpouring of grief and anger. But those are short-term emotions. That's not what ends a war. Outrage doesn't end a war because outrage doesn't necessarily last very long, especially in today's world. You're outraged about this thing today, that thing tomorrow. What ends a war is a concerted diplomatic and military effort, and we really haven't seen that on any side in such a fashion as to end the Syrian war. In fact, one of the depressing things about the Syrian war is that it's a proxy war. There are all these powers playing against each other there, but none of them are being hurt. Iran is not being hurt. Russia's not being hurt. The United States is not being hurt. Even Turkey is not being hurt by that war. They can keep people dying in Syria for another 10 years and may well do it.
Do you think there is we have this absence of political will to resolve the conflict? Do you think there is also an absence of, I wouldn't want to say domestic will, certainly the absence of people in countries in Europe, for example, who are all very well to tweet a picture and this is terrible, but not so willing to help resolve the refugee crisis or migrant crisis?
Well, no, and they don't. In fact, we've gone backwards. Immediately after Aylan Kurdi, there really was a sentiment that we should do something about the refugee crisis. People started to do something. More refugees were let in. And by Christmas time, we had a huge backlash against that. And we continue to have that backlash. And then we also, of course, have had the terrorist incidents. People more and more equate terrorism with immigration. And we have other issues, which we'll probably discuss later, that show all kinds of frictions developing in all kinds of, sometimes in surprising areas, between Muslim communities and the rest of Europe.
A depressing picture. Elena, do you want to add anything to that?
Also in France, we are approaching very slowly to the election. I'm sure that this will be the primer subject we'll discuss the nearest month.
Sure, with everybody in the political spectrum that you've ever heard of is trying to move to the right of everybody else, including the socialists, including Manuel Valls. So.
Vacuum on the left. Well, let's turn to other matters now. The month of August here in France is when most people are on holiday. Streets of the capital are blissfully calm as everyone heads to the beach. Well, not quite everyone. If you're a Muslim woman who chooses to cover up, you and your burkini are no longer welcome on several French beaches. Towns across the country are queuing up to condemn the modest swimwear. Ban it from the beaches lest the sight of a covered female body offend French sensibilities. Christopher Dickey, are you offended by the sight of the burkini?
I have to tell you, I'm more offended by the sight of some of the naked or half-naked bodies down on the beach.
Me too.
I mean, you really, it's like, put it on, please, put it back on. But I think, and men as well as women, but I think that it's a complicated issue here because on the one hand, certainly nuns can go to the beach dressed in their habits. Nobody asks them to put on a bikini, and they do it. And nobody complains that they do it that they're fully clothed for religious reasons. But the problem with the burkini is that it's being seen, portrayed, and to some extent it's a true portrayal, as a flag that's being raised by some Islamists in France. Because it's one thing if you want to wear a cross or a Star of David, or even if you want to have some other sign that you're Muslim. But if you have women dressed in burqas, niqabs on the street, and if you have them wearing these burkinis at the beach, so the argument goes, they're making a statement about Islam, not just a statement about themselves. And in some places, in Marseille, for instance, you do see that beginning to be an issue. But when it's an issue in a place like Cannes, where there are no burkinis on the beach, or never were before, or it's an issue in Pas-de-Calais, where the mayor of Le Touquet says, we haven't seen any burkinis here, but we're going to ban them just in case, then that's political posturing on the right.
So what's really behind this ban,
like
then?
With Dieudonné. As soon as they just forbade his show all over the France, just in case it will go further. So it's the same story, I think, with the burkini.
Sure. And, you know, to have the Prime Minister of France come out and say that the burkini, this, generally speaking, ugly Lycra bodysuit, is against the values of France, that there should essentially be a secularism test for beachwear, is just nuts. I mean, when it comes right down to it, that's nuts. And there was a violent incident in Corsica where some women were wearing burkinis, but they were with their families. This was not a demonstration.
Yes.
They were with their families, and they got into a fight.
But do you really think it's a fight was because of burkini? Because
It was the mayor of the city actually said the women wearing the burkinis
Yeah,
were
but
not at
the-
fault here.
it was,
It was an idea that helped to provoke it.
But
and
what
this
they
is
say after the investigation, it was like this family wanted just to appropriate this piece of the beach and not to let other people to go on this part of the beach, which devoted to Muslims visitors. This is completely another issue.
Well, as I say, it's a complicated issue, but the other question was people were taking pictures of them, and then that was, of course, that raises all kinds of questions under French law about privacy. So it all can get very complicated, but the basic issues are twofold. One is right-wing political posturing against Muslim demonstrations of faith. The other is, on the Muslim side, on the Islamist side, efforts to provoke that kind of reaction by playing games with burqas, with the whole idea of a burkini day at a water park outside of Marseille. What was the group that was doing that? If you look on their website, the group that was pushing it was basically coming out again and again against unbelievers, was denouncing Christians. And as one of my Muslim friends said, wait a minute, that was supposed to be all women at the water park that day. So why would they need to wear burkinis?
Exactly.
Those are to protect them from the eyes of men.
Well, it strikes me that the women who choose to cover up and wear these suits are being caught in the middle of what could essentially be an ideological battle. The other question that I have is, would we be discussing this if we were not in what's termed silly season, the quiet news cycle? Is this being blown up out of proportion because it's the summer?
That can be as well, because as soon as you come to the newsroom, what we are discussing today, it's again burkini because there is 3 mayors or one French deputy who is making a statement about it. Of course, there is
the
something,
Prime Minister too,
or Prime Minister, of course. There is something of this, but also as soon as it's summer in the beaches and it's Nice, so it's next to the terrorist attacks, and we still remember. Maybe it's all these things connected together. It gives us such a
and the ban only lasts till August 31st.
Exactly.
But will the debate go away after August 31st? Because it seems there's more to this than
the court
just...
cases won't go away, but I guarantee that if a woman wants to walk in November down the beach in Cannes wearing a burkini, nobody's going to stop her.
No, it's the surfers. It's completely different.
That's right, it'll be surfers.
But this does raise issues about France's secularism, and some say it's a secularism which could be becoming fundamentalist in itself. Do you think that Elena, that the France's secularism is itself mutating into something else? Are there extremists on the secular side who are trying to push the arguments as well?
I don't know if there is a mutation. I always keep the several ideas of the like-stake, the version when everybody has to be protected from the state, like we have in England or United States, and like we have in France, that religion has nothing to deal in the state businesses. So when they go to court against the mayor of Cannes,
Yeah.
it's completely the first stratagem. It's not the French one, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I like the French idea of secularism. I think that the idea of the separation of church and state is a really important one. We have it in the United States, but then we have "In God We Trust" on our currency. So it's not at all the same as it is here, but where it has always been much more militant. And I think you have to remember that it started out as a militancy opposed to the Catholic Church, because Catholic priests, the curé in the countryside, they could determine how people would vote, and they did all the time. That's why there was this effort in, I think, 1905 to get the church, and that was all that people cared about in those days, get the church completely out of the affairs of the state. Now you have a substantial part of the population that's Muslim, and part of that population really does not believe that you can separate church and state. So I think that presents problems.
problems with the separation of church and state. I don't know. I'm not sure I'm very happy with the state telling me what to wear, though, but that's possibly reading too much into it. That's about it for this edition. I would like to thank my guest, Christopher Dickey, foreign editor at the Daily Beast, and Elena Servatas, Russia expert and journalist with Radio France International. And thanks to you at home for joining us here on The World This Week. Do stay with us on France 24. The news headlines are coming up next.